nobody actually believes them. Hardly anyone's life is improved by them. This moment is too inherently ridiculous to continue, and so it won't. The people in charge know this. That's why they're hysterical and aggressive. They're afraid. They've given up persuasion. They're resorting to force. But it won't work. When honest people say what's true, calmly and without embarrassment, they become powerful. At the same time, the liars who've been trying to silence them shrink, and they become weaker. That's the iron law of the universe. True things prevail. Where can you still find Americans saying true things? There aren't many places left, but there are some, and that's enough.
That's great. Steve Krakauer is here. He's the editor of the wonderful, and I mean this, you must sign up for his Fourth Watch newsletter. You can go to fourthwatch.media to sign up for it. And his book is Uncovered: How the Media Got Cozy with Power, Abandoned Its Principles, and Lost the People. Please go read that book. No one has a better lay of the land of the media than Steve Krakauer. Steve, how you doing, brother?
Hey, Mike. Thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. So we talked in the last segment about how we got here. So I want to talk to you about where we are and where you think we're going now when it comes to media in our country. It's a big question, but what do you see?
Yeah. I think that the firing of Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon, the closing, completely shuttering of BuzzFeed News, the bankruptcy of Vice News, and I've got some sources that say this is just the beginning of where we're going with this period in time. I think this is a massively pivotal moment in the media landscape right now. We've seen kind of the post-Trump, post-COVID era of the media has kind of come and gone, and now we're awaiting what comes next ahead of 2024. And I think that there is massive shifts in where we're going to go, because these media outlets that sure, they had great business models and they're still making large amounts of money. They see the writing on the wall. They see the audience declining and going elsewhere. There's so much choice. There's so much independent media out there right now for people. And so they're really starting to feel this crunch. And I think that what we're seeing right now is they're prepping for what's to come right in this moment. These next couple months are going to be massively pivotal. And this is just the beginning. So I do think that we're going to see massive shifts. There's more still to come. And I think that the real winners and losers are going to shake out in the next 6 months or so.
Oh, great question. I want to ask you about the winners in a second. But before that, so big tech has laid off a lot of people, and they would say, oh, well, we just grew a lot, and now we're just cutting down to maybe a more sensible level. Do you think that's what the media is doing, or is it more tectonic and fundamental of a change than just, oh, we're laying off 10% of our workforce?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. There's certainly the idea that, look, Donald Trump was good for business. He'll be back, and he'll be good for business again. But I don't think at the same level that they once were, and I think that they realize that it's not sustainable necessarily. But I also do think that there's something fundamental and potentially existential that's going on with a lot of these media outlets also. Just take BuzzFeed News as an example. What is BuzzFeed News? What was BuzzFeed News? Because now it's gone. Who the hell knows? I mean, the problem there is that they never really were anything. And in fact, if they were anything, they wanted to be like the CBS Newses and ABC and NBC, and they wanted to emulate a business model that is dying in and of itself. And so in the absence of being something specific, they tried to be everything to everyone and failed miserably at it. So I do think that that's part of what we're seeing. It's part of the shift, the audience that's simply going elsewhere. They're no longer sitting down and turning on their TV in the same way that they once did. At least fewer and fewer people are. And so in the absence of that, how do you adjust to this new normal? A lot of these outlets never really gave that much thought.
Yeah. So who are the winners moving forward? What does it take to win now?
I think that you need to be smaller, nimble, and really aware of what you are. I've been very curious to see Chris Cuomo's podcast. I think it's a really great example. I would not suggest everyone go out and listen to Chris Cuomo's podcast, but it's a great example because it's someone who has no idea who he is. Chris Cuomo was a big star at ABC and then a big star at CNN, and now he's tried to build this Chris Cuomo project around himself, and it's just such a great case study because he has no idea who he is, and it's very obvious, and there's a reason why no one's really going and tuning in and watching on YouTube or on the podcast. So it's going to take people understanding who they are. Now, So that I think is going to see winners that are in the podcast space and in the YouTube space, certain Rumble outlets. I think that there will be a shakeout of independent media, and we're going to see that on a big scale. And then I also think that there are people that were kind of the first movers, outlets like the New York Times, which might have lots of perceptions about the New York Times. I think they do some terrible work and they do some great work every day. A lot of times that great work is overrun by the negative work, but what they saw what was happening, and there's only going to be a few winners from the traditional legacy media. I think places like the New York Times are going to do that because they were thinking about this 4 or 5 years ago, and a lot of these outlets never really gave that much thought.
What are they doing? I see some of their good work too, but how have they shifted? How did they get in front of a shift? What have they done?
They're winning on the podcast side. They have the top podcast in the game with The Daily. They're winning on the newsletter side. They were very early in building that audience and trying to think. They understand games, Wordle. I mean, they know that people think of the New York Times in a lot of different ways, and it's not by picking up the newspaper anymore. And it's not even by people necessarily writing nytimes.com into their browser. They're really thinking about the fact that they need to be very specific things to a lot of people, but know who they are and really build on that beyond just trying to be the resistance to Trump, like so many, like the Washington Post failed at.
I got an interesting question for you, Steve. So I obviously like this more fractured media. Here we are on the first TV, right? So I think it's good. And if you want this, you go here. And if you want this, you go here. And not just to get everything filtered through 3 nightly news outlets, right? I think there's a ton of good to that, obviously. And as you said, this person knows who he is, and I want more of that in my life. Right. That's a good thing. What is a downside, though? And I'm thinking about this in terms of we don't have anything in our pop culture, I believe, that unites us as a country. And the only thing I can think of is the Super Bowl. It's like the only thing that we all watch together at the same time anymore. And there's something really important about that pop culture unity that I don't know if exists. There's something, it may seem silly, but no, Seinfeld's on Thursdays at 8 o'clock. And we all watch it Thursday at 8 o'clock. And we just don't do that anymore. And I'm trying to figure out what we lose with a fractured media. As good as it is, and as much as we all benefit, what are some things we lose too?
I agree with you. I think that there is, that for it to be functioning properly, for our media, for our journalism landscape to be functioning properly, we need both. We need strong independent media that is completely disassociated from the corporate power structures that are so cozy with Washington, D.C. and New York City elite. We need that, but we also need strong institutions because those institutions have massive resources. They have strong legal departments. And I mean, just from a practical standpoint, they can go up against the big guys. Now, a lot of times they choose not to. A lot of times they go cozy and they don't actually do what they should be doing. But if in a properly functioning environment, we need both. And I also agree with you. I think that we don't have the cultural touch points that unite us as a country. So I would actually say, though, in the absence of that, we need to find IRL, real life things that can do that in our own communities, because we're not going to get that on a national scale, I don't think, anymore when it comes to what is popular in culture. There's so much disassociation now, so many different outlets, so many different shows and content, places to find things. We've got to go find real things to unite us rather than the culture.
Yeah, great point. And I love, not to talk all about Tucker, but he had a great line at his Heritage speech talking about how he only trusts things that he can smell. And I just really like that concept. Yeah. You have a great chapter in your book called Laziness and Incompetence versus Conspiracy. So I keep going back and forth with the media because it's all about churn. I was at some, I forget, it was a debate or whatever. And there was someone from some major news outlet and she had to churn out 6 articles a day or something ridiculous like that. So there's just no quality there. But then you also have this other side that's no, these people have a fundamentally different worldview than I do, and they're out to get us. So which is it in big media world? Is it just incompetence and laziness or conspiracy?
That's what makes this so hard, is that it's really both. It depends on the story. We have to acknowledge that there is certainly some conspiracy there. I started Uncovered talking about the Hunter Biden laptop story in October 2020. That was perhaps the most egregious example of the censorship collusion racket that we see among the elite industries, tech platforms, the government entities and intel agencies, and the corporate media themselves colluding to ensure that you didn't see the story, or at least believe the truth about that story. To this day, so many people still think that was a Russian disinformation effort. It's absolutely true that that was conspiracy. But a lot of times that doesn't explain what happens on a day-to-day basis, where stories, the media outlets get things wrong, or they choose not to cover things a certain way because there is a laziness to it. And to be honest, there's also a fear to it. So many journalists, I interview in Uncovered the founder of The Wrap, and she has said that some of her reporters, she has seen them cover a story in a different way or not cover a story at all because they were afraid of what the reaction on Twitter might be. Now, that's not a big conspiracy. That's just living your day-to-day life in a way that I have a job to do. This is my job. I'm a journalist, but I'm afraid of getting backlash from 50 people yelling at me on Twitter. So we have to acknowledge that it's both, and both are pervasive, and both are big problems.
I'm fascinated by what CNN is trying to do, trying to get back into what? News, or get back in the middle, whatever that is. Do you see what they're doing working?
Well, I see it. I see that. I think the heart is in the right place. Let's start there. Don Lemon is fired last week. And next week, Donald Trump is back on the air in a town hall there with Caitlin Collins for the first time on CNN being interviewed in 7 years. So I think that there's a direct correlation between those, right? I think that, though, it's going to take massive restructuring to undo the damage that was done reputationally to that network, which was seen as boring old CNN. When I worked there, 2012, 2013, no one was wearing CNN hats and rooting for CNN. There weren't a lot of, I love CNN. But they respected it, and they turned to it when the news happened, because it was just the news, boring old CNN, the news. They need to get back to that. Maybe that doesn't bring in massive ratings, but it does bring back a brand, something good for the brand that is needed, I think, in the environment. We need a place to go that you trust, that the majority of people trust, and they completely obliterated that in the old era. So I think that there's a long way to go, but I do think that that's the right direction that they should be going.
Yeah, hard to build trust. Goodness me, very, very hard. It could take a whole generation to build trust. But this whole idea of the middle, do people even want that? Right? We're so tribal, and we so want to go to our team. Is there even an appetite for something else?
I think the middle is maybe the wrong way that I would look at it. I think of someone like a Glenn Greenwald as someone this is a guy who supported Bernie Sanders. And only in 2014 and 2015, as he was reporting out the Snowden documents, was the darling of the corporate media, if you will. I mean, he was winning Pulitzer Prizes. He was a regular on MSNBC. And then something fundamentally shifted, and Glenn Greenwald didn't change. He didn't suddenly become a conservative or suddenly become some moderate in the middle. He was always the same, but what he represented and how he cut against the elite, that became of more interest to a lot of different people that cut across boundaries. Maybe you're in the middle, maybe you're apolitical, maybe you're independent, but now you trust him because he's someone who has principles that are very obvious. So I don't think the middle is what people should be striving for. I think being their true self, putting trust and truth as what matters more than anything else, and having a respect for the audience, because that is something that is very obvious, that a lot of people in the corporate media suddenly didn't even respect their audience enough to show them various points of view. That is very obvious too. Yes,
that's Thomas Sowell's vision of the anointed. We are merely the benighted, the pitiful and contemptible, ignorant masses that they look down upon. And if that can stop, then they can maybe go some places. The great Steve Krakauer, sign up for his newsletter, fourthwatch.media, and his book is Uncovered: How the Media Got Cozy with Power, Abandoned Its Principles, and Lost the People. Steve, keep up the great work.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks, brother. Hey, thanks for watching that clip about the media, about it seems like it's all collapsing and what will rise from the ashes. The whole special is available on the First TV's app, which you can download for free, and also our Politics by Faith podcast, because in this special we also ask a very interesting question: should Christians watch the news? Should Christians be engaged in politics? there's so much lying and cheating, and it's just like, it's a mess, right? So should we even engage in such a messy worldly game? I believe the answer is yes. And we explain why in our podcast, Politics by Faith. You can download it everywhere, Politics by